A gute Woche and a guten Chodesh. So Rabbi soll gesund sein, began the Farbrengen this afternoon that there are major inyanim and at times there are minor inyanim. Meaning that when we have the major inyan, this inyan includes many smaller inyan. Firstly, today is Shabbos. So this is an inyan klali, it's a general inyan. Shabbos is something which is mekacha v'kaima, as the Gemara uses the expression. In other words, this is something which is set in the Bria, in the universe. It's arranged so that every seventh day we have Shabbos. Comes something additional onto today, the fact that it is Shabbos Rish Chodesh. To have Shabbos Rish Chodesh, this is something which we also have it more than once a year. It's approximately twice a year that we have Shabbos Rish Chodesh. In addition to the fact of today being Shabbos, and today being Shabbos Rish Chodesh, a little bit more particular, it is the Shabbos of Rish Chodesh Elul. Regarding the month of Elul, we find in the Alter Rebbe, in Lekutei Torah, as the Rebbe referred to Lekutei Torah today, he says that the Frierdiker Rebbe in Nesichas refers to it as the Chasidische Parsha, the Chasidische Sedre, that is the Torah Oyer for the Chomoshim of Bereshis and Shmais, and Lekutei Torah on the other three Chomoshim. So in the Torah Oyer, rather in the Lekutei Torah of this week's Sedre, of Parshas Chiyei, he discusses the inyan of Elul, based that Elul is abbreviated in the word of Ani ledoidi v'doidi li, and the Alter Rebbe in Lekutei Torah explains the entire concept of Elul with a mashal. Famous mashal which the Alter Rebbe writes it in Lekutei Torah, and the Frierdiker Rebbe in his Mamorim explains it at length. And it's a mashal of Bnei Ha'ir, people from a city that wanted to greet the king who was about to enter the city. So the Bnei Ha'ir left the city and went into the open field. When they came to the king, who was at the time in the open field, the Alter Rebbe explains that when the king is not in his palace, but he is in the open field, he's mekabeles kol odom b'sever panim yafes. He's extremely friendly to everybody, and everybody has access to him, and everybody can approach the king and go over and request whatever they want from the king. The same, the Alter Rebbe says, is the idea of Elul. Elul, it's considered like the Melech is Basod. And the Alter Rebbe explains at length that this is why the month of Elul is a month when Chassidus explains the Yud Gimel Midas Harachmim stand Begolui, because it's all that based on this philosophy that the Rebbeinu Shalom is considered like a Melech Basod. So when mentioning this mashal, the Rebbe says there's however one thing which requires an explanation when we're talking in the mashal. Ir, a city, when we're talking about a city in Ruchnias, concept of a city in Ruchnias, we refer to Ir Elokeinu, city of godliness. When we're talking about a soda, it means an open area. Ir can be to such an extent that an ir can be considered a reshus hayachid. The Rebbe quoted a halacha that a city that has gates, and the gates of the city are locked at night, then this city is considered a reshus hayachid. When we are talking a concept of reshus hayachid in Ruchnias, what do we mean in the spiritual sense? It means a reshus, an area which is for the yechida shalaylam, for the Rebbeinu Shalom. So that's what the ir stands for. So we say that the Yidden are residents of the Ir. They are leaving the Ir to go into the Sada and greet the Rebbeinu Shalom. The question, however, arises, how does the Melech come to the Sada? In other words, the mashal starts that the Melech is in the Sada. The Melech, we're talking about the Melech in this sense, the Rebbeinu Shalom, what shaykhs does Melech have to Sada? Ir is something which is a much higher madrega than Sada. Ir is something which relates to the idea of Ir Elokeinu, as we just explained, and in of Rishus HaYachid, Yachid B'Yichid Shalaylam. So we say that the Rabbeinu Shalom is where? Not in the Ir, but where is the Rabbeinu Shalom? He's in Sada. Which isn't something which the Rebbe raised this question, and went back to the concept of Ani L'Doidi V'Doidi Li. Ani L'Doidi V'Doidi Li, besides being Rosh Tevis Elul, each one of these words ends with a Yud. 4 times Yud, we get a total of 40. This has a shayches to the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Shamayim on Rosh Chodesh Elul and came back on Yom Kippur. So the 3rd time when Moshe went to receive the Luchos was on Rosh Chodesh Elul. That is when Moshe Ola Bahar on this day of Rosh Chodesh and came back 40 days later. Incidentally, talking about this Inyan, the Rebbe says that in Halacha it is quoted that there are 3 opinions when Moshe Rabbeinu was Ola Lahar. There's one day that it was Aleph Elul, the 1st day in the month of Elul, which in our case would be the 2nd day of Rosh Chodesh. There's another opinion which claims that Moshe Rabbeinu went on the 1st day of Rosh Chodesh, which is the last day in Av. There's a 3rd opinion which claims that he went on Erev Rosh Chodesh Elul. In other words, a day before Rosh Chodesh. But regardless, these are the days, amongst these days, it was when Moshe went Lashamai. So here the Rebbe explains, the Alter Rebbe teaches us in Tanya, based on the pasuk, Va'ata Yisrael, Ma Hashem Elokecha Sheil Mi'imach, Ki'im Liyira Yisai. It's pasuk in Chumash Dvarim. What is the Rebbe asking for us? Only to fear him. So the Gemara asks, V'chiyira milse zutresehi. Pasuk makes it, to something very minor. All HaKadosh Baruch Hu is asking is we should fear. Is Yiras Hashem considered a milse zutras as something minute? It's not a kleinigkeit to fear the Rabbeinu Shalom. So the Gemara responds, Ein lagabe Moshe milse zutrasi. If we're talking about a person like Moshe Rabbeinu, for him it's not something that outstanding to be God-fearing. So the Alter Rebbe asks in Tanya, this pasuk has a shaykhus to every Yid. The Gemara responds only about Moshe Rabbeinu. However, how should every single Yid react to this request of Va'ata Yisrael, Ma Hashem Elokecha Sheil Mi'imach? And based on this, the Alter Rebbe explains that every Yid has within him a part of Moshe Rabbeinu. Every Yid has a shaykhus to Moshe Rabbeinu, and there's a part of Moshe Rabbeinu within every single Yid. And Memela, this inyan of Yiras Hashem is addressing itself to every Yid, but every Yid as he is tied with Moshe Rabbeinu, as he has the Moshe Rabbeinu within him. Memela, it is back to what the Gemara says, it could be considered a milsa zutrase, something minor, because every Yid has a shaykhus to Moshe Rabbeinu. Memela, the Rebbe says, if today is the day when Moshe Ola Lamorim, when Moshe went up on the mountain, how do we have to take a lesson from every union that we hear? And as the Rebbe mentioned, was here or later in the Farbrengen, especially based on the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, that anything and everything we come across is Ashgacha Pratis. Memela, this is the day when the Moshe Rabbeinu that is within every Yid can uplift himself to the mountain. To which mountain? We're talking about the mountain of Sinai. So that's the specialty of today's day. It's a day when every Yid can rise to a higher madrege. Every Yid having a shaykhus to the Moshe Rabbeinu, because every Yid has a Moshe Rabbeinu within him. So this is the day when we all can rise higher on the mountain of Sinai. And here the Rebbe mentioned that Rosh Chodesh Elul, we have 2 days. So actually the 1st day of Elul, we are really still in the month of Av. It is Lamet Menachem Av. As far as the date is concerned, it's still Lamet Menachem Av. However, the custom is still that to begin reciting L'David Hashem Oiri V'Yishi, the Frierdiker Rebbe introduced that when do we begin this? We begin this today. B'Negeya blowing shofar, which we practice all of the month of Elul, this we begin tomorrow. Okay, this year, it couldn't have been different because the first day Rosh Chodesh is Shabbos. But even if the first day Rosh Chodesh would not be in Shabbos, we always start blowing shofar when? On the second day of Rosh Chodesh. However, the reciting of the David Hashem Oiri, whereby we express L'cha Ama Libi Bakshu Ponai, the search of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which this corresponds to the concept, the Rebbe says, of Anila Doidi V'Doidi Li, the close hamshacha, which we want to arouse within ourselves to the Rabbeinu Shalom, particularly on the month of Elul. This we begin even today. So today is Takeh. On one hand, we are still in the month of Av, but on the other hand, this is the day of Rosh Chodesh Elul already. So this is when we begin reciting L'David Hashem Oiri daily, towards the end of Shachas and towards the end of Mincha. Memela, all the inyanim of Elul, of the Anila Doidi V'Doidi Li, and everything that Elul stands for, Melech Basad, and all what we just went through, all of this is effective as of today already. So therefore the Rebbe concluded the Sikha that today's day is extremely suitable for accepting Hachlotais Toives, good decisions in the line of elevating ourselves, which this corresponds to the idea of Moshe Olal HaMorim. This is the day when Moshe went up onto the mountain of Sinai. So this day is extremely suitable that we accept upon ourselves such type of achlotas, such type of decisions. And being that they are accepted on a day like today, it will be much easier to bring them into a reality and to fulfill them. And here the Rebbe also brought a pasuk, which is in the Haftarah of Parshas Chiyei. We did not recite it in today's Haftarah because today we said the Haftarah of Rosh Chodesh. But originally this is in the Haftarah of Riyei. There's a pasuk in Yeshaya, V'samti katkoid shimshei sayich. Ben Shalom says, katkoid, it means like an illuminating stone. The Rebbe says that he will bring lichtigkeit to us through the windows. And the pasuk uses the expression katkade. So this pasuk is discussed in Gemara. Gemara gives various opinions. What is the exact explanation of this type of diamond, this type of illumination, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bring the lichtigkeit to us? And the Gemara brings two opinions. Then the Gemara concludes, leheve kedain ukedain, that it will be like both, like this opinion or like the other opinion. Kedain ukedain all lies in the word of katkate. Katkate is spelled Kav Dalet, and again Kav Dalet. So this stands for Kedain Ukedain. The Rebbe, throughout the Farbrengen actually, spoke, beginning from the first Sikha and throughout later Sikhas, the Maimer and other Sikhas, kept on getting back to this pasuk, that the idea of Katkade, Kedain, applies when we have two inyanim combined. Getting back to today, like to the fact that today is Shabbos and today is Rosh Chodesh, this is also an inyan of Katkade. So we have the inyan of Shabbos and we have the inyan of Rosh Chodesh, and we have, as these two inyanim are combined, which is the combination of the two, which this again fits into the concept of Katkate, Kedain, Ukedain. So there's this inyan and there's the other inyan. Then we have how they both come united as a Katkate. In other words, Kedain, Ukedain, and it is united in one word as one. The same thing about the outstanding inyanim of today, the fact that it is a Shabbos, and a Shabbos of Rosh Chodesh, and particularly Rosh Chodesh Elul, all these inyanim are outstanding inyanim in themselves, and how much more so is it when they are all combined together. It was later in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe spoke that we are getting close to the beginning of the school year. And Memela, it is our obligation to see to it that every Jewish child should be getting a proper Jewish chinuch, a chinuch kosher, al taras hakodesh, as the Rebbe expressed himself. And there are some of us that may say that we are not suitable or we are not effective to go out and see and influence children, that they should go to yeshivas and proper yeshivas and so forth. So for those that feel that way, they have to do it at least in another way. If they themselves can't do it, then let them go ahead and appoint others to do it, or assign others to do it, or at least participate with funds so that others should be able to do this tremendous task. Then the Rebbe says there are such that feel that they have done enough in this field already. They have influenced many, many children to come into a yeshiva. And Memele, they have done their share. This, the Rebbe says, is not so. We cannot satisfy ourselves until we know that every single Jewish child is receiving a proper Jewish education. Here the Rebbe brought, it's mentioned in Svarim, regarding the word tzibur, a community. Tzibur, a group. So it's brought in Svarim that tzibur is a Rosh Tevis, an abbreviation. Tzadikim, Beinanim, and Reshayim. In other words, when are we considered a complete tzibur? When we have associated ourselves with all types of Yidden. Rabbi brought a Gemara. The Gemara says, Kol tainis she'im behem, from a chelbana. A chelbana is what we say in davening when we're talking about the various spices. And it's interpreted that a chelbana means somebody who is not that perfect. So the Gemara says that any tonis, what's the idea of a tonis? A tonis is that Yidden are congregating, getting together to ask the Rabbeinu Shalom for his assistance. So the Gemara says that when Yidden do that, and there's no chelbana amongst them, there is something lacking. Memela, when we want to show the Rabbeinu Shalom that we are a proper tzibur, when can this be done? This can only be done when we are adjoining with all types of Yidden. Talking about this Inyan, the Rebbe began talking that it's already the high and proper time for Mashiach to come. The Rebbe expressed himself, Ad Masai, how much longer will Yidden stay in Galus and suffer so severely as we are suffering in Galus? The Rebbe says there are those fools, those tipshim, who think that we are living in a harchava. In other words, we are living comfortably, and it is comfortable b'gashmiyas and it is comfortable b'ruchnias. The Rebbe says it is not so. Neither is it comfortable b'gashmiyas and neither is it comfortable b'ruchnias. And it's already the high time for Mashiach to come. The Rebbe says the Rambam tells us that every single act of a person is of vital importance, not only for himself, but it may be that the one act of a person may weigh over and the entire scale, and this will have an effect not only on him, but it could be machriya for the entire world, l'kaf schus. And here the Rambam says, in the same halachas, where the Rambam discusses this Inyan, the Rebbe says, the Rambam also says that we go according to the majority. We don't have to wait until everybody should be perfect. So the Rebbe says, so why is the coming of Mashiach being held up so long? We don't have, in other words, it's already time, it should be Yoyer Hashem Panav Elecha Vichoneka. The Rebbe was holding back his tears and was talking about it, very demanding that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should reveal His holiness to us, and it should be real lichtik in the fullest sense. And it's already proper time for Mashiach now. And how much longer do Yidden have to be in Galus? Yidden went through enough in Galus, and it's enough years that we are in Galus already. And what should happen is that the Rebbeinu Shalom should send Mashiach and take us out of Galus. And Yidden then first we will begin to taste what is a harchava, what it means convenience, sai begashmius, and convenience, sai beruchnius. It's customary, the Rebbe learns in Inyan, in the Rashi of this week's Chazarah, as well as in the Pirkei Avos, and also in the Rambam of the Shia Rambam. Regarding the Rashi, it is in Parshas Chiyei, Kapitel Yud Gimel, Pasuk Yud Gimel. Here the Pasuk begins, Kisishma ba'achas arecha, asher Hashem Elokecha noisen lecha. If you will hear in one of your cities, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving you to inherit, in other words, we're talking where about one of the cities in Eretz Yisrael, L'Sheves Sham, you will hear Leimer, and the continuation of the pasuk is that people will go out and worship Avodah Zarah. But Rashi on pasuk Yud Gimel quotes the words L'Sheves Sham, one of the cities which you will be given to live in. Rashi explains, Prat Yerushalayim. It's an exception for Yerushalayim. Shaloi nitna ledira. Yerushalayim was not given to live in, to live there. It says it's Rashi, which requires a lot of interpretation. What do we mean Yerushalayim was not given to live there? If we were to say that Yerushalayim is not given to be divided amongst the Shvatim, that's one thing. But that's not what Rashi is saying. Rashi is saying, Prat Yerushalayim shaloi nitna ledira. Now what does that mean? Does that mean that if somebody lives in Yerushalayim, he doesn't have to put a mezuzah on his door? Definitely not so. Somebody lives in Yerushalayim, he immediately has to put a mezuzah on his door. That's the halacha, that as soon as he moves into his to an apartment or to a house, if it's in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim as well, he has to put a mezuzah right away. So what does Rashi mean here? Should we say that Rashi means the fact that Yerushalayim is not considered part of the Nachla? In other words, it wasn't given to any specific Shevet, and therefore the halachas of Nachlas which go on other areas of Eretz Yisrael don't apply to Yerushalayim. So first of all, again, this is not what Rashi is saying. Furthermore, let us look back in this Sedra. There's a Rashi where the pasuk talks about the Beis Hamikdash. Rashi there tells us that the Beis Hamikdash was in the Shevet of Binyamin. In fact, there's another Rashi that says that was partially in the Shevet of Binyamin's area and partially it was in the territory of Yehuda. So we already see from Rashi in this week's Sedra that Yerushalayim was considered a Nachla of Shevet Yehuda or of Shevet Binyamin. And here Rashi comes out with an idea, Yerushalayim shaloi nitna ledira. If we were to look for the source of Rashi's Pirush, is in Sifri. The Sifri adds another word into this Pirush, which Rashi omits. Rashi doesn't bring this word. So again, we must say that Rashi in Pshuta Shel Mikra is accurate why he omits that word. If I remember correctly, the word is Shaloi Nitna Livnois Dirois, or something like Lebeis Dirois. And Rashi quotes the word Lebeis Dira. So every word is extremely accurate, and still Rashi, this one word base, doesn't quote. So the Rebbe is learning what does Rashi mean by Prat Yerushalayim shaloi nitna ledira? Very simple. It says as follows: entire Eretz Yisrael was given to Yidden that they should inherit it. Each Shevet got its share in Eretz Yisrael, and there were dinim how one part which belonged to one Shevet was not allowed to be transferred to another Shevet. There were various halachas which apply to all of Eretz Yisrael. However, Yerushalayim, the Rabbeinu Shalom gave us Yerushalayim with a different intention. Yerushalayim was given to us not that it should be diros, that it should be residential, that it should be apartments. Yerushalayim was given for a completely different goal. What was Yerushalayim given for? To have the Beis Hamikdash, to have the Gilu Shechina there. Yerushalayim is special than entire Eretz Yisrael. Now naturally, if one lives in Yerushalayim, he definitely has to adhere to put on a mezuzah on his door, and it has all the dinim of like a house elsewhere. However, what Rashi is trying to say is that the goal of Yerushalayim is not to serve as apartments. It's not given stam as a residential area. There is something deeper to Yerushalayim. That Yerushalayim is what? An idea, as the Rebbe stressed, I mentioned it here, mentioned it later, that Yerushalayim is composed of two words, Yira Shalom, a completeness of fearing HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Memela, this is what Yerushalayim stands for, and this is what Rashi says. Prat Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is an exception of entire Eretz Yisrael. In what sense? Shaloi nitna ledira. Yerushalayim wasn't given to be just to live there. Yerushalayim is given for all the spiritual meaning which Yerushalayim has. And this is what Rashi is commenting here. That Yerushalayim has a completely different value spiritually as opposed to all other areas in Eretz Yisrael. Recently, the Rebbe has been many occasions mentioning a Gemara. Gemara tells us regarding Rab Zeira. There was an Amoira Rab Zeira. Gemara tells us that Rab Zeira fast was fasting. There's one opinion that it was 40 Tanesim. There's another opinion that it was 100 Tanesim. Well, it tells us that Rab Zera was fasting all of these days, ki heiche de lishkach Talmud Bavli, so that he should forget the Babylonian Talmud, he should forget our Talmud, and he should be able to involve himself in the learning and the study of Yerushalmi. Rebbe quotes this Gemara at many occasions. So the Rebbe asked today a very obvious question. We know that we are not allowed to lead ourselves to forget an inyan and Torah. If intentionally, chas v'shalom, we forget an inyan and Torah, we are oiva an aloi sasa. It's discussed, explained in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Hilchos Talmud Torah. And here we say that Rab Zera went ahead deliberately and fasted at such a tremendous amount of fast days, so that what? So that he should forget Talmud Bavli and should be able to involve himself in the study of Yerushalmi. So the Rebbe says, let's explain the Chassidus, what is basically the difference of Yerushalmi and Bavli. In Bavli we have a lot of kashas and terutzim. V'reminhu is a kasha, then the Gemara responds with a teretz, and that's how basically this shakla v'talia of Talmud Bavli is built. In fact, there's a Gemara, the Gemara says based on a pasuk, b'machshakim hishivani, I was set into darkness, it's a pasuk in Eicha, the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, zeh Talmud Bavli. What does it mean, Bavli is darkness? Because it takes a long time till we can come to a conclusion in Talmud Bavli. There's differences of opinions and all different types of kashas and one kasha and another kasha. So to come to a final conclusion in Talmud Bavli, it takes quite a while. Memela, it's like until we come to the conclusion, we are considered like being in the dark. So that is why the Gemara refers to the Talmud Bavli as an inyan of Choshech. This is what Rab Zera wanted to forget. Rab Zera did not want to forget the halachas, the mishnas, whatever the halachas are based on, chas v'shalom, this he didn't want to forget. These are inyanim and Torah which he never wanted apart from. What Rab Zera did want, he wanted to forget the shakla v'tarya of Talmud Bavli, so that he should be able to get involved in Talmud Yerushalmi. In Talmud Yerushalmi, they are primarily it's set up in a way that there are none of these kashas. It goes straight. In other words, we immediately approach an inyan and have a clearness in the thing. We get it in a lichtigkeit, because we don't have to go through all these types of kashas and terutzim and differences of opinions and an upschlag and learning one way, learning another way. The way Talmud Yerushalmi is set up, it is in such a way that immediately we have a clear and precise explanation. Memela, this is what Rab Zera was trying to get to. He was fasting so that he can come into this derech of learning, rather than the derech of learning of Talmud Bavli. That's why he wanted to forget the Talmud Bavli and come to learn Talmud Yerushalmi. But chas v'shalom to say that Rab Zera wanted to forget the halachas, or he wanted to forget the basics of what each halacha is built on, as it stands in Mishnah and so forth, chas v'shalom, this one is not allowed to forget, and definitely a person, Rab Zera, would have never aimed to forget that. However, what he wanted to forget was all the various shakla v'tarya, the choshech in Ruchnius, the spiritual sense, and come to Talmud Bavli, and come rather to Talmud Yerushalmi, which is considered, as Chassidus uses the expression, an oyer yashar. It's an open, straightforward approach where everything is explained very clearly and given in a very precise way. Regarding the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, it is Perek Hamishi today, and the Rebbe discussed a Mishnah in Perek Hamishi, which is towards the very end of the Perek, where the Mishnah tells us all the various ages, what one is suitable at various ages. And the Mishnah concludes, Ben Tishim Lasuach, when one is at an age of 90, that is when he walks stooped, he walks eingebeugen, he can't walk straight any longer. And then the Mishnah tells us, Ben Meya, when one is at the age of 100, it is Ki'ilu Meis, va'avaru batel min ha'olam, as he has died and passed away from this world. Because we're talking about it. Normally, one is striving to live to 120 years of age. So here we're talking about a person who's a ben meya. The Rebbe says perhaps they are Yidden around of this age, and they're praying Perek, and they'll be reciting today's Perek. Look what they're going to find themselves saying. That ben meya, if one is at an age of 100, it is as if he were dead, passed away and ceased from the world. Furthermore, the Rebbe says, this old age man who's going to be saying this Perek, his great-grandchild will walk over to him and will point him, look what the Mishnah says, bring to his attention, look what the Mishnah says about a person who's a ben meya. And this is the type of description that the Mishnah gives on such a person. That's right. And the Rebbe added on that there are people that could live to such ages, that are living to such age. So the Rebbe says we must learn that the Pshat in the Mishnah is, it's explained in Chassidus, Ba'ariches, that the Mishnah here is talking when one has reached the age of ben meya, he has accomplished his avodah in this world, ki'ilu meis va'avaru batel min ha'olam. Everything which is negeya to olam, which is negeya to the world, he has already accomplished. Chas v'shalom, we're not talking that Mishnah says as if he were dead, passed away and ceased. Chas v'shalom. The meaning is that he has lifted himself to such a madreige that his avodah at present is no more in yonim that have a shaykhis to olam. He's working on in yonim that are lamaylam in olam, that are higher than olam. What the Mishnah is talking before ben tishim lasuach, when a person reaches the age of 90, his body is stooped. So this the Rebbe says here, the Mishnah Mistama wants to explain, what the Mishnah here wants to say is that no matter how old a person is, he's still obligated, as the Rambam says, that if one is ill, or one who's about Yisurim, Rachman al-Islam, everybody is mechuyev to put his share into learning Torah. And he's mechuyev to be kaveitim l'Torah. So the Mishnah is telling us, even a ben tishim, who is lasuach, who's already cannot walk straight anymore, so we have to, this person is also obligated to have his kfiyas sitim l'Torah and so forth. That's one taich. Another taich is ben tishim lasuach, that's lasuach stemming from the word sicha, tefillah. That he's already at a high madrege where he's involved in solely dedicated to davening. Then the Mishnah comes to a yet higher madrege. The ben meya, he is ki'ilu meis for other batel min ha'olam. The all in yanim of olam he has no shaykhs to. He has uplifted himself to be higher than olam. That is what the Mishnah is talking about. But chas v'shalom to say that the Mishnah is looking in any negative way on a person who's over the age of 100. Chas v'shalom. On the contrary, the Mishnah is praising this. The one who is a ben meya, he was so successful that he lifted himself to such a level that he can be all in yanam of olam he has no shaykhs to. His avodas Hashem is in what type of derech? In yanim that are lamaylam in olam. Last week in the Farbrengen, when the Rebbe explained the Rashi, Rebbe was talking the difference between the others and Moshe and Aaron. That the Avos, the life of the Avos was such that they were melumid bin nisim. They constantly had miracles throughout their entire life. However, as the Rebbe explained, Moshe and Aaron lived more like a normal type of a life. Personally, at least, their life was more, they didn't go through nisim on day to day as the Avos did. Today, the Rebbe came back to this inyan. Seems like questions were asked in this inyan. The Rebbe explained regarding Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu sinned with the Mei Meriva, with the waters. And that is when HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him that he will not enter Eretz Yisrael. In fact, Moshe Rabbeinu was different than all of the Deir HaMidbar. That is why we find in Chumash, and Rashi brings it, that Moshe Rabbeinu requested from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that each time he would mention that Moshe is not entering Eretz Yisrael, the Rebbe would always specify why. Why? This is to stress that the reason Moshe is not entering is not the same reason why all the Yidden are not entering. All the Yidden weren't entering because they were complaining, but because of the Chet HaMeraglim. And there was a time that they didn't want to go into Eretz Yisrael. They were complaining about Eretz Yisrael. So that is when the Gzar Din, the Rabbeinu Shalom, made the decree that they will take it out into Eretz Yisrael. However, Moshe Rabbeinu did not have a shaykhs to this. Moshe Rabbeinu did not resent going into Eretz Yisrael. On the contrary, we find that Moshe was begging the Rabbeinu Shalom, we should let him go into Eretz Yisrael. And this is Pashas V'Schanan. V'Schanan Moshe Rabbeinu was begging HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Rabbeinu Shalom should give him permission to enter Eretz Yisrael. Until the Rabbeinu Shalom told him, stop asking me, because if you will continue asking me, what will people say? That the Rav is such a hard person that he doesn't want to give in to the request of his Talmud. So don't beg me that much. Mamela, I shouldn't have to refuse you again. What do we gather from all this? That Moshe Rabbeinu did have a love and a desire to go into Eretz Yisrael. It was only because of the Mei Meriva, because of the Chet by the waters, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu punished him that he shouldn't go into Eretz Yisrael. On the other hand, we find that Moshe Rabbeinu lived exactly for 120 years. Aaron lived 123. And as the Rebbe explained last week, when we're talking 123 is still considered around the 120 mark, because within 5 years, one way or another, it still has a shaykhus to that age, and that is why Rashi brings in Bereshis that by the others we find that once they reached within the 5 years before their fathers passed away, they began fearing for the Inyan HaMiseh. So Mamela, from here we derive the concept that 5 years within a lifetime is considered around that same number by a total years of life. However, by Moshe Rabbeinu we find that he lived exactly 120 years. So the Rebbe explained why Taka was it so by Moshe. Because by Moshe found himself totally associated with Klal Yisrael. To such an extent that when the Yidden sinned by the Egel, Moshe Rabbeinu was begging HaKadosh Baruch Hu for forgiveness. And when the Rebishter did not want to forgive, Moshe said, Im ayin mecheni no misifracha shekasofta. If you're not going to give in, Rabbeinu Shalom, to forgive to the Yidden, then erase me from your Torah. In other words, Moshe was so close attached with his generation, particularly with the Doir Deya, as the Doir HaMidbar is called, the generation of wisdom, that Moshe felt that if he could not accomplish from the Rabbeinu Shalom forgiveness, then he has nothing to do anymore. Then he's telling the Rabbeinu Shalom, erase me. Then he's not accomplishing his goal. He looked himself as the leader of Klal Yisrael of that generation. Memela, if he could not have received the forgiveness from the Rabbeinu Shalom for an Aveira, which the Yidden did, then he has nothing to do anymore. This concept, this is what Moshe Rabbeinu lived up to. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu lived with an idea that if not being associated with his generation, then he has nothing to do anymore. Memela, when the Doir HaMidbar finished to pass away, after being 40 years in the Midbar, there was no room for Moshe Rabbeinu to be around anymore. His generation, the people he was so closely associated with, all passed away. So here we're back to the concept of Mecheni no Mesifra Hashakasafta. The Moshe does not see any reason for himself to be around anymore. So that is why it worked out accurate that Moshe Rabbeinu Taka did not live longer than 120. V'hayu yom of Me'ah ve'eschem shana, it was Taka exactly 120, because when Moshe Rabbeinu reached to the age of 120, that is when the entire generation of Deir HaMidbar people passed away. The male, if the entire Deir HaMidbar passed away, then Moshe Rabbeinu was left without his generation. He didn't have anybody to be around with anymore. So that is why Moshe passed away exactly to the age of 120. There was no inyan for Moshe to live longer than. Regarding the Lekutei Levi Yitzchak, as it's customary in the Farbrengen, that the Rebbe always learns an inyan in the Zayar of the Seder of the week that has a shaykhus to the Seder with the commentary of his father. In Pashas Riyeh, there is no Ha'aris from Rabbi Levi Yitzchak.
No what?
There's no commentaries from Rabbi Levi Yitzchak on the Zohar of Riyeh. So the Rebbe referred to the Igrois Levi Yitzchak. There's a sefer of correspondence of letters which Rabbi Levi Yitzchak wrote Most of the Sefer is letters which Rabbi Yitzchak wrote to his son, to the Rebbe Zol Gesund sein. The years after the Rebbe has left Russia. These are long letters based on in-depth inyanim of Kabbalah, which the Rebbe's father was writing to the Rebbe Zol Gesund sein. And the Rebbe says in one of those letters, his father refers to an inyan which has a shaykhs to this week's Sedra, as well as to the Shir HaRambam of today. And that is the inyanim of Maisa. Maisa Sheni, and Maisa Oni, which these inyanim are discussed in this week's Sedra and Pashas Riyeh. As well, it has a shaykhs to the Shurim and Rambam, which we are learning these days. And in the letters of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, he's explaining these inyanim. The system of Maisa Sheni and Maisa Oni was as follows. A Yid had to give Truma, which went to the Kohen, or all fruits and vegetables, or anything that grow. He also had to give Maisa to the Levi, and he would also have to give Maisa Sheni or Maisa Oni. See, Trumas and Maisares was given every single year. Maisa Sheni and Maisa Oni would be in an alternate system. It would work as follows. It would work, everything would be based on a 6-year period, because the 7th year is Shemitah. So Shemitah, there was rest from field work. So for 2 years, it would be Maisa Sheni. The 3rd year, it would be Maisa Oni. Then again, 2 years Maisa Sheni, and the 3rd year, Maisa Oni. What is Maisa Sheni? Maisa Sheni is that for these 2 years, and again, if the skipping a year, 2, in other words, 4 out of the 6 years, or 4 out of 7 years, anyway we should look at it. Every Jew was obligated to take a certain amount of his fruit and travel with it to Yerushalayim, and spend it and enjoy it in Yerushalayim. The idea behind it is, Rebbe mentioned it many occasions, this would give a Yid an opportunity to come to Yerushalayim and be in the atmosphere of Yerushalayim. As we just mentioned what Yerushalayim is, the whole idea of Yerushalayim is Yira Shalem. And there he would come together with his family, and he would spend and enjoy his fruits or his whatever he would bring, and have an opportunity to absorb within himself from the Kedushas Yerushalayim. That's the reason for this mitzvah. After doing this for 2 years, he would skip a year and give a special Maisa to Ani, to the poor. So as the Rebbe explained today, a Yid is given all types of avodas. There's an avodah for the poor, and there's an avodah for the rich. In fact, the Rebbe brought, there's Tfilas Oni and there's Tfilas Oshir. Explained in Chassidus. Chassidus claims that Moshe Rabbeinu's Tfilos are considered, it's a medrash on it, that Moshe Rabbeinu's prayers are considered the prayers of a rich. There's also the prayers of the poor. Memela, a Yid is given an opportunity to be in both, to excel in all levels. Memela, when he gives Maisa Sheni, it is a concept of the rich. In other words, he's taking his fruit and he's traveling to Yerushalayim and he's enjoying it and serving the Rebishter that way. When he gives Maisa Roni, it's a different approach. It's an approach of serving the Rebishter by helping the poor people, by giving charity to the poor, that they should be able to sustain themselves, in addition to all other different types of tzedakos. This is in the spiritual sense of these mitzvahs. Now we have in today's Shir Rambam, Rebbe says we have a halacha as follows. In Hilchas Maisa Sheni, in Perek Zayin, the halacha, Rambam tells us this halacha. Peiros hanil kochos bekesef Maisa Sheni, fruit which were bought with the money of Maisa Sheni, eino nifdin berichuk mokoim, cannot be oisgeleist. In other words, one cannot bail them out, exchange these fruit, if he's in a distant place from Yerushalayim. Ella, the Rambam continues, yalu hein atzmam v'yochlo b'Yerushalayim. Let us get back a step. We said that the fruit Meiser Sheni means he takes these fruits and carries it, schleps it, gets it to Yerushalayim, and in Yerushalayim he would enjoy them. Him, the owner of the fruit, together with his entire family. However, one could do something else. One could take the fruit and exchange it for money, and then take this money and buy fruit in Yerushalayim and spend it there. This is what we would call Peiros Hanilkochos Bekesef Meiser Sheni. In other words, these peiros, these fruit, are bought with the money of Meiser Sheni. It's not the original Meiser Sheni fruit. It's fruit purchased with money of Meiser Sheni. So the halacha is, being if he has such type of fruit not in Yerushalayim, he's not allowed to go ahead and exchange it again for funds and later go to Yerushalayim and buy fruit. He's not allowed to do it. Then the Rambam continues, Zeh choimer bilakuach bekesef meiser mipeiros meiser atzma. Here we have a halacha where fruit which are bought with the money of meiser, there are more strict halachas pertaining to these fruit than to the fruit of the meiser itself. Because fruit of the meiser itself, I can go ahead and exchange for money and take this money to Yerushalayim later and buy new fruit in Yerushalayim. However, once I exchanged the fruit for money and bought fruit with this money, which this goes into the category of Peiros Hanilkochos Bekesef Meiser Sheni. Here we are no longer allowed to exchange it again and bring money to Yerushalayim and buy fruit again with it. But the halacha is Yalu Hein Atzman V'Yochlam B'Yerushalayim. Rabbi says it's a very strange halacha, which all the commentaries on the Rambam are searching to explain the logic of such type of a halacha. The halacha is, because the strangeness here is, we are giving more strictness to fruit which is not original Meiser fruit than to the fruit which is original Meiser fruit. And the Rebbe says if we would look into the Neisei Kelim of the Rambam, to the commentaries around the Rambam, we will find that they all get involved in different type of explanations. One of the explanations which they bring, and the Rebbe said, is this is similar to the idea of Chamurim Divrei Seifrim Midivrei Torah. There's a klal that at times Divrei Seifrim means inyanim which the Chachamim said. Inyanim which the Chachamim said are more strict than Divrei Torah. Obviously, we always have a contrary approach. Obviously, always our approach is that Divrei Torah, we are more strict than things which the Chachamim have said. At times we use an approach of Chamurim Divrei Seifrim Yosem Divrei Torah. Though this is Divrei Seifrim, reasons for it, the various reasons are given. Simply the interpretation is, because being that this is Divrei Seifrim, it's not Divrei Torah, so that's why at times people may approach it with a certain amount of leniency. So that is why the Chachamim have originally set it up in such a way in order to avoid people reacting with a lenience to these type of inyanim. So they have arranged that Chamurim Divrei Seifrim Yosem Divrei Torah. The same type of an approach the Rebbe says we will have to learn here in the Rambam. That we have given more strictness to fruit which was bought with in other words, as an exchange, not the original Meiser Sheni fruit, than to the Meiser Sheni fruit itself. And again, the Rebbe said that the commentaries on the Rambam explain this inyan at length, but basically this would be the most simple explanation to approach this halacha with such type of an approach. A gute Woche and a guten Chodesh and a ksive v'chsime tova.